Highlander is a truly unique franchise. What makes it stand out is that despite its cult status and fame, none of its films ever succeeded at the American box office. Every feature film about sword-wielding warriors that made it to theaters inevitably flopped. However, that didn't stop producers from releasing new films, TV series, and animated projects based on the original. Today, let's talk about the rocky journey of the franchise and take a closer look at its most expensive failure. The first film hit theaters in 1986. For its time, it was a fairly expensive project. It wasn't a blockbuster, but $16 million was still a significant amount in 1986. To put it in perspective, Tom Cruise's Top Gun cost less, and James Cameron's The Terminator seemed almost like an art house project by comparison. The biggest problem with the first Highlander was finding an actor for the lead role. Every actor the producers approached turned them down immediately. Even Mickey Rourke showed them the door. Kurt Russell seriously considered the offer, and he probably would have taken the role if not for Goldie Hawn, who convinced him that Big Trouble in Little China was the better choice. So he picked that instead. With no lead actor and the risk of losing everything due to the high costs of pre-production, the filmmakers scrambled and ended up casting the relatively unknown Christopher Lambert. Hiring him was the idea of director Russell Mulcahy. The producers were in for a shock when they found out that Christopher Lambert barely spoke English. They didn't discover this until after they had already signed the contract. But Russell Mulcahy didn't see it as a problem. After all, Connor MacLeod was Scottish, so a strong accent would make sense. Then the production caught a lucky break. Sean Connery's career was in decline at the time, so he was willing to take almost any role as long as the paycheck was good. He was paid $1 million for Highlander and spent just a week and a half on set. Later, Connery admitted it was one of the most stressful weeks of his career because he was nearly stabbed multiple times. The closest call came from Clancy Brown. Since Connery insisted on doing his own stunts, he refused a stunt double for his fight scenes. During one take, Brown got so into the moment that he almost took Connery's head off with a sword. Furious, Connery stormed off the set, cursing. When he cooled down and returned, he regretted not using a stunt double. After that incident, Connery started each day by gathering the crew and giving instructions. He offered acting tips, explained how to work more efficiently, and wasn't shy about criticizing anyone he thought wasn't pulling their weight. According to him, these morning talks made the set much more productive, but no amount of productivity could save Highlander at the box office. Not even Queen's iconic soundtrack, written specifically for the film, could help. With a $16 million budget, the movie only made $6 million in the U.S. Since international distribution deals were handled separately, the filmmakers may have recouped some losses, but exact figures are hard to track down today. Highlander could have remained a standalone film, but after its home video release, it finally earned back its production costs. That's when the producers announced plans for a bigger, more expensive sequel. Originally, Highlander 2 was supposed to hit theaters in 1989. If it had, it might have avoided many of the disasters that plagued its production in the late 80s and early 90s. Production delays were constant, in part because Russell Mulcahy had signed on to direct Rambo 3. However, as soon as filming started, Sylvester Stallone fired Mulcahy for refusing to follow his orders. One moment in particular proves that Highlander 2 was made at the wrong time, in the wrong place. After Russell Mulcahy was dismissed from Rambo 3 and returned to Highlander 2, production ramped up quickly. The studio decided to shoot in Buenos Aires, Argentina, hoping to save money by taking advantage of the exchange rate between the peso and the dollar. In other words, they assumed that since the country wasn't wealthy, throwing a few US dollars around would get them cheap labor. However, they picked the absolute worst time. Just as production started, Argentine President Carlos Menem introduced major economic reforms. By late 1989, inflation had skyrocketed to 5,000%. For the filmmakers hoping to cut costs, this economic chaos led to endless problems. Signed contracts were broken, and key props had to be imported from other countries. Expenses spiraled out of control. The budget, originally set at $20 million, quickly ballooned to $30 million. Panicked, American producers and the film's insurance company stepped in to take control. What was originally envisioned as a dark, dramatic sequel was gradually reshaped into a mainstream, action-packed blockbuster. If filming had started just a year earlier, everything could have turned out differently. And if Stallone hadn't fired Russell Mulcahy, he would have continued working on Rambo. In that case, the producers would have seen the situation in Argentina and likely moved the production somewhere else, avoiding a lot of problems. Instead, constant scandals and script changes became the norm during filming. That's how aliens from other planets and endless jokes ended up in the movie. On top of that, Back to the Future Part 2 had just come out, and the producers decided that Highlander 2 needed its own version of hoverboards. So, of course, they added them immediately. Michael Ironside later admitted that when he saw how messy the script had become, he figured that if he was stuck in the movie anyway, he might as well have fun. He entertained himself on set by turning his character into an unhinged psychopath. His goal was to make the villain the most memorable part of the film, and in that, he succeeded. Christopher Lambert, however, had a much harder time. He hated the new script so much that he tried to leave the project several times. But due to his contract, he was stuck. Breaking it would have cost him more than he could afford. Director Russell Mulcahy wasn't happy either. At one point, he even demanded that the producers remove his name from the credits and replace it with Alan Smithee. However, his contract prevented him from doing anything that could harm the film before its release, and changing his name in the credits would have been a clear violation. The only person who was happy was Sean Connery. He joined the film at the insistence of an outraged Christopher Lambert. Connery spent just 9 days on set, but walked away with a $3.5 million paycheck. By then, his career was back on the rise, and he refused to do anything for less. Once the film was completed, the producers struggled to find a major distributor for Highlander 2. Knowing about all the production issues, 20th Century Fox, the studio that had handled the first movie, turned them down. After a long search, only a small company called Interstar agreed to distribute it, guaranteeing Highlander 2 a release on 1,000 screens in the U.S. Director Russell Mulcahy wanted nothing to do with the film. Just 15 minutes into the premiere, he walked out. Since he had fallen out with the producers, he hadn't been allowed to edit the final cut, so the theatrical version was completely out of his hands. After Mulcahy distanced himself from the movie, the actors followed suit. Even the franchise's producers abandoned it, pretending Highlander 2 never happened. Fans quickly picked up on this, joking that the next installment should be titled Highlander 3: The Apology. Later, a British distributor allowed Russell Mulcahy to release his own version of the film. This cut was 10 minutes longer and removed all references to aliens, bringing it closer to the original script. However, according to Russell Mulcahy, it was still impossible to make the film he had envisioned with the footage that existed. With a $30 million budget, Highlander 2 made just $15 million at the box office. There's no clear information on how well it did on home video. After the second film, the franchise's rights holders decided to focus on television. They developed a Highlander TV series. Christopher Lambert was offered the lead role, but turned it down immediately. Eventually, he agreed to appear in just the pilot episode to pass the torch to Adrian Paul. There's a funny story about this. Initially, Lambert agreed to do the pilot for $50,000, but French investors thought that was too much and asked him to lower his fee. Lambert was so offended that he refused to appear at all. When the producers realized they couldn't move forward without Connor MacLeod, they ended up paying him $500,000, 10 times his original asking price. The series, starring Adrian Paul, was a huge success. It ran for 6 seasons and spawned multiple spin-offs. Seeing its popularity on TV, in 1994, the producers decided to bring Highlander back to the big screen. Highlander 3 was the first film in the franchise to receive a PG-13 rating. The first 2 had been rated R. Staying true to the franchise's tradition, the third film was also plagued by script issues. It was rewritten so many times that no one really knows which version ended up being filmed. Originally, Highlander 3 was supposed to be a prequel to the first movie. One of the biggest last-minute changes involved the soundtrack. Director Andy Morahan, who had previously directed music videos for Guns N' Roses, approached the band to contribute songs, just as Queen had for the first Highlander. The musicians were on board. However, when Axl Rose found out that Mario Van Peebles was in the movie, he backed out. He told the filmmakers he would only write music for the film if Van Peebles was replaced. No one knows exactly why Axl Rose refused to work on a film that included Mario Van Peebles, but the filmmakers couldn't fire him because Christopher Lambert had personally brought him into the project. The two had worked together on Gunman, and Lambert enjoyed working with him so much that he immediately recommended him for Highlander 3. Van Peebles accepted the role without hesitation. When Highlander 3 was released in the U.S. in January 1995, it suffered the same fate as its predecessors. It flopped. Based on audience ratings, most Western viewers consider Highlander 2 to be the worst film in the franchise. However, in some countries, Highlander 3 was the least successful installment. Despite yet another failure, the franchise kept going. Highlander was still thriving on TV, gaining new fans and attracting new investors. In that way, Highlander is similar to the Terminator franchise, where every film flops, yet new investors keep coming in, convinced they won't repeat the mistakes of their predecessors. The fourth Highlander film was produced by Dimension Films, and this time, the studio decided to merge the theatrical and TV versions of Highlander, hoping to bring both fan bases to theaters. Many people know that Jean-Claude Van Damme was once considered for the lead villain in Highlander Endgame. By then, his career had already shifted to B-movies, but he refused to play the bad guy. At least that was the official reason. Instead, the studio hired Bruce Payne. However, shortly after arriving on set, Payne became seriously ill and spent 3 months recovering. As a result, a stunt double replaced him in most scenes. Highlander Endgame was also one of the first films to use a deceptive trailer. It included several scenes that weren't in the actual movie. Initially, people assumed these scenes had been cut, but the filmmakers later admitted they had shot extra footage specifically for the trailer to make the movie seem bigger and better than it really was. Merging the TV and movie versions of Highlander didn't help. With a $25 million budget, Endgame made only $15 million worldwide. Later, another Highlander movie starring Adrian Paul was released on TV, but it received abysmal ratings. There was even an attempt to turn Highlander into an anime, but it wasn't particularly popular either. After 2007, Highlander was finally shelved. But that wasn't the end. For years now, John Wick director Chad Stahelski has been attached to the project, with Fast and Furious producer Neil H. Moritz backing it. A new Highlander movie is expected to be released in 2026, starring Henry Cavill as the lead character Connor MacLeod. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned.